All right, welcome everybody. I've been asked to do a presentation today on my insights on what dairy farming could look like, particularly now as our climate is changing. One of my passions is around ventilation and cooling, and in my opinion, it's a very easy win to improve the environment in a dairy farm for cows, and something that I don't necessarily understand why, but we seem to have quite a number of roadblocks in the industry through, I guess, perhaps lack of understanding, lack of bravery. But for today, we're going to be looking at changing climates, and we're going to look a little bit more than just inside the building. Just a really brief oversight in terms of who I am. I am based in Canada. I do work for Artex Barn Solutions. My role is a little bit unique, as our core business is selling barn equipment. I spend a lot of my time doing training, troubleshooting, putting strategies together, and going through cow and people flow and dairy farm design. So it's really rewarding for me, because I then get that experience of not only putting together a strategy or some training or some KPIs, I get to actually experience the very cool outcomes that we see with our customers. So I want to paint a wee picture, because we hear a lot of the doom and gloom of dairy, and yet dairy farming has a really great future. The demand for animal products such as milk in particular is increasing globally. And when I climbed into this and I looked at the Food and Agricultural Organization, they had posted what does the future of dairy farming look like right out to 2067. So in 47 years' time. So what they're saying is they are estimating that we're going to have a population growth of about 38%. So we're going to grow from today, which is about 10.6 million, to 10.5 billion people. So that's a lot of people to feed. And interestingly enough, the majority of that growth is actually going to happen in Asia and in Africa. And what that means is that as our population grows, the area of croppable land is going to decline. So right now, on average, it's 0.2 of a hectare. And in 47 years' time, it's potentially going to be dropping to 0.15 hectares. And in countries where there is already less arable land per capita, you're going to see a lot more competition for that land to grow food for feeding people versus growing food to feed livestock. So that's going to make that kind of challenging for a lot of the regions. And then with regards to dairy demand, we're actually going to see a milk consumption increase. So we're going to see it pop up to 37% increase, or 119 kilos per person. And what that means is that we have to find 600 billion more liters or kilos of milk to feed the growing population. So, and one thing that we need to also remember, and this is where we need to get rid of the doom and gloom, is that milk, believe it or not, contrary to a number of beliefs, it is the best food for us to get our essential nutrients. The other thing to be mindful of as well is that globally, the average cow has to increase her milk production by 47%. So the global average right now is about 2,400 kilos of milk. It needs to go from that up to 4,500 in 47 years on average. So yes, there are regions in the world where they are already achieving that, but we have a lot of regions globally that we are nowhere near that. And the other thing too to note is that when we talk about milk and cows, right now, dairy cows globally produce 82% of the world's milk. So lots of things to be mindful around where the dairy industry will be heading. It's not going to disappear. So when I was putting this together, there are a couple of things I had to grapple with, because, you know, if we look at the slide previously and that need for significant increase in milk production across the globe, we also understand that globally the world is warming up as well. I think it's warming up by about 0.85 of a degree annually, and that may not sound like a lot, but it becomes significant and very impactful. So as we want more milk for our cows, and as the world is heating up, there's this kind of lack of synergy, shall I say, because to get more milk, we need to get, and this is in terms of the liquid value, we need to get a bigger cow, because typically the bigger cow has produced more milk. But then as we get the bigger cow, she then needs to eat more feed. And we know that if we're feeding her the wrong food, she's going to heat up a lot quicker. Plus, when we're feeding a bigger cow, she becomes a little bit less efficient at converting feed to milk, because the bigger cow requires more milk for her maintenance. So yes, she eats more, but slightly more of that is going to be apportioned to maintenance versus, you know, significantly more of it going in towards milk production. And then the other aspect of all of that is that we have to remember that as our cows produce more milk, they become more sensitive or more intolerant to the climate. So we've got all these challenges. So right now the industry is saying, and a realignment needs to happen now anyway, but we're saying on average, a cow goes into heat stress at a THI of 68. So a THI being the temperature humidity index. But we all know that our highest producing cows in our herd, so our Formula One dairy cow, is more sensitive when it is actually at a lower THI. And right now, we don't know exactly what that is, but we know it's less than 68. So then how do we deal with that when we're looking at even our dairy farm today that we have, or if we're looking to build a dairy farm, how do we deal with, or how do I deal with today? And then how do I deal with tomorrow? And then how do I deal with the future? All right, so when I'm building my dairy farm now, or if I'm looking at my dairy farm now, you know, I don't need to be looking at it, or I shouldn't be looking at it from a today aspect or even a tomorrow aspect. I've got to be looking at my dairy farm for the future. And the future is depending on what that number is for you in terms of where you want to be dairy farming in the future. All right, so technology. Technology does clear the way. Dairy farming, dairy farmers is becoming more modernized, particularly in the developing countries. So we are seeing a lot more advancements in technology. The most obvious one being robots. So we're seeing a lot of robots in our dairy farms, and a lot of other automation in terms of robotic feeding, robotic pushing feed up, and other pieces of technology I'll get to in a second. So the robots or technology becomes increasingly important, more so around the robots allow us to get more data, more cow-specific data, so that we can be more proactive in the way that we manage our system. And it also reduces the total number of staff on our farm. It also changes the caliber of staff that we have on our farm, and that's something also that we need to be mindful of. Cows, they love consistency. They love routine. They love the robot milking. They may not love the robot, but they like the consistency of the way the robot milks the cow, because it milks that cow pretty much the same way every single time. And cows are very habitual in their behavior. They like to have the same thing done at the same time every single day. And when we put people into that equation, we know that everybody does it slightly different. So, you know, we start to change the behavior of the cow, or that cow loses that lovely consistency. The other part of the technology as well is around the sensors. So, you know, we see a lot of collars, pedometers, RFIDs, and this allows us to get more information from the cow. So the stock standard one is obviously milk production, and we can pick up too whether or not we have an elevation in somatic cell counts. We can get the reproduction activity, and we can get the rumination activity. So that helps us as dairy farm managers or dairy farm owners to see what's going on with the cow, and we can be more proactive in how we manage our one individual cow in our big herd if her normal behavior just starts to change a little bit. Like if she's on heat, we see more activity. If she's not feeling well, we see less activity. But other things that we need to be mindful of is around the other automation. Okay, so we've got smart software now that will tell us, hey, your cow's not very well, her activity has dropped based on A, B, C, and D. We think that she might have X, Y, Z, or X and Y, depending on what symptoms that it's picking up. And we're moving now towards being able to have that sort of smarts with our equipment. Not just the robot itself, because we do have that smarts already, but in terms of some of the other pieces of equipment that we have on our dairy farm, so that, for example, you don't lose a lot of water through leaking troughs, or your pumps stop working, or your fans have stopped working. And smart technology around, hey, if that cow's not standing in this area where this nozzle is, then my soaking nozzle is not going to turn on, and I'm not looking at all this water hitting the ground and being wasted. And it's like, hey, my fan's not working properly, or the symptoms that my sensor is picking up on my fan, for example, that says, hey, we've picked up A, B, and C, so you need to go look at this at fan number 20, because we think it's either A, B, or C. So it's going to start eliminating some of the, hey, how do I diagnose the problems on my dairy farm? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what I believe is the 3 big ticket items around what future dairy farming needs to take into consideration to take us from the path of where we are today to where I think the future of dairy farms are going to be looking like. So the first one is climate, right? Climate has a huge impact on the future of our dairy farming, right? You know, technology is going to help, but climate is very complex in how it interacts, and it entangles in what our dairy farm or our cows are able to do. And then how well, as a human being, as the dairy farm owner, as a dairy farm manager, are we able to adapt to the climate, right? How quickly are we going to be reactive or proactive to what's going on my farm? You know, am I going to be an ostrich, put my head in the ground and go, well, you know, it doesn't normally get this hot. It's just a one-off heat wave, so I'm not going to do anything about it. And then year 2, the same thing happens, and we still don't really want to do anything about it, to how brave am I around doing something now, knowing that it's just going to get worse, and I need to make sure that I've got myself geared up. So, you know, you can see that in the slide here, looking at Central Europe, that the temperature, or the THI, has increased between 1973 to 2008. So it's an increase of about 4%, which, you know, is quite significant because now I'm getting a lot of hot days. So climate change is not about stepping in from one climate to another, but it's about how do you deal with the continuous change, because it's just going to keep on keeping on. So in terms of our intensive farming system, so this is dairy farming under a roof, and even dairy farming outside on pasture, it's looking at the investment. You know, how much are we going to spend on the investment, because of what we think we're doing is not just investing for today, because today it was hot, but it's like, well, hey, what's it going to be like if in 40, 50 years time, or 47 years time, it's going to be, you know, 10, 15% hotter than it was back in 1973. What are some of the things that I do? And I don't have to do them all right now, but I need to be thinking about what are the steps that I need to take to make sure that I'm okay today, that I'm going to be okay tomorrow, and that I'm geared up to be able to handle what it's going to be like for me in 15, 20, 30 years time, if that's what I'm going to be doing. The other aspect too, with regards to this, it's not just the dairy cow in our farm, but there's also the direct consequences of growing my feed. I may not be growing the feed myself, but if I'm going to be going to somebody to buy my feed, you know, then what's the impact on them? Because if I'm seeing more droughts, hotter conditions, shorter growing periods, then how does that impact on where and how I get my feed, and what sort of prices am I going to be looking at? And remembering that I could be in a region where now I'm having greater competition with growing food for people, and there's not so much available for me to grow food for livestock. So with the climate comes the cow. So if we look at the cow, you know, we've got yesterday's cow, and yesterday's cow was a dual purpose animal. So, you know, if she wasn't making the grade with her milk production, she became the freezer production. So whether that be the freezer beast for me, or she's going down and being used to supply meat to the supermarkets. Whereas today's cow, and today's cow wasn't that long ago, is a single purpose animal. So her sole purpose in life is to just make milk. And so the cow today produces on average 30 to 35 kilos of milk per day. And that number is looking at her everyday production. So every day is the period that she's milking, and also the period that she's dry. So the average cow. And then I look at tomorrow's cow. Tomorrow's cow is going to have to be more functional, right? She's going to have to be more fertile. She's going to have much better health traits. She's going to have to be a much better converter of feed. And we're going to be evaluating her not on her type, not that she's, you know, nice black, nice white, 4 white socks, wee diamond on her forehead, but we're going to be looking at her from a profit point of view, right? Gone will be the days where we have the typey animals, and we might end up with a cow that, you know, today we know that our cow is happy between, well, she likes the single figures, so 5 degrees Celsius, but they can tolerate the heat up to about 21 degrees Celsius. But we're going to be looking at a cow that perhaps is going to be okay at slightly higher temperatures, right? Because we are seeing that our temperatures are increasing. So, and we're going to be pushing out the challenges for that cow to be able to do that. So today's dairy farming is going to shift more into the temperate zones as our climate adjust. So, you know, if we have the middle of the world, or where the equator is, and we have these very hot bands, you know, these very hot bands are being pushed out, so our cooler climates become our temperate climates. So we're looking for cows that are going to be able to sit in a hotter environment and still be able to produce what we need and be profitable. So let's look at her, right? She's going to have multiple, as I said, she's going to have multiple body part functions. Like I said, she's not going to be the ideal breed, the very typey animal. You know, we're going to see that shift away where 95% of the herd owners are going to have the profitable cow. And I pulled a quote from Don Bennett. A number of you will know who he is, owner of North Florida Holsteins. He lives in a very challenging climate. Florida very hot, and Florida extremely humid. And so his comment is that the preferred cow is going to be the most profitable one, right? She's going to be the one that gives you the most protein and the most fat, pure body weight, with all the right traits that we need for the dairy cow. So we need to be mindful of that with global warming, the cows will change from the animal that functions best in the cooler climate to the animal that's going to be a little bit more heat tolerant. And, you know, we're aware that the Jersey is a few degrees more tolerant to heat than the Holstein. And actually not so long ago, somebody has alluded to what's known as the slick gene. So that's to do with hair, the hair coat, so the coat being a little bit more slick. But again, you know, that's just kind of a minor detail, but they are the sorts of things that we're possibly going to be looking at for that cow that's going to be all kinds of colors. The other thing to note too is that, you know, when I was looking at this, and my picture does come courtesy of Dr. Jack Britt, is that he, with a number of his associates, you know, have predicted that in the US in 20 years time, you know, the cow is going to average 18,000 kilos, so 40,000 pounds of milk. But shifting in 50 years time, that same cow is going to need to be averaging 24,000 kilos or 55,000 pounds. So that's the average cow, not the top cows, because we know that the top cows can already do that, but we're looking at the dairy cow average. So technology is moving very fast. And yes, technology, there's apps everywhere for all kinds of applications, right? And like I said, we're seeing a lot of robots entering into dairy farms and a lot of automations. Farmers are upgrading their dairy farms into more high tech. And again, it's to allow us proactive management and to also deal with some of our labor shortfalls. But we also need to be reminded or mindful that our labor skill changes, right? We need to have or find more skilled labor that is going to be able to deal with the technology, right? We're going to be wanting the labor to be able to deal more with the numbers, because when we get into big herds, there's a lot of numbers to crunch. And yes, we are seeing that the data now that we're getting is smarter and it's giving us more exceptional information. But we right now don't have that much data. There's a lot more data that everybody is looking to add to the dairy farm for the dairy farmer. And so that we have to be cognizant of the fact that, okay, I still am going to need some people to do work that is traditional right now, but I'm going to need a lot of different people involved in looking at what does that information mean, because we might be able to get it through one single platform, but there's a lot of information that we have to try and process. And so we have to be looking at those people that are going to help us do it. So right now, like I said, we have tech on our farm for feed, pushing, feeding, milking our cows. We're seeing too that we're getting a lot of optical recognition happening as well to assist us with some of the cow behavior. And, you know, the most obvious one we have is that software on animal health, where it says, hey, your cow's got a problem, go check her out. But we're going to end up with technology that's going to be addressing things like the fan's not working as well, the soakers aren't working so well. Hey, my bedding's low in that area, you need to go deal with that situation. Hey, the water's not so clean in there, go deal with the situation. Or it's automated to say, hey, I just dumped this because the water was dirty. So there's going to be all this stuff that we're going to be working with, and how are you going to deal with that data? And that's just inside your building. We also have this whole string of information that comes in around what's going on with the climate. So you've got one half of it that's just looking at the animal husbandry and the animal performance to slot into our cow, our dairy farming profitability. And you've also got the feed side of it, right? So if we're having really hot weather and we're not getting any rain, then we know that we're going to be having a problem with our food supply. And we have challenges with pests and parasites. You know, animals get into heat stress as well. So that creates a whole lot of issues and shortfalls that go on that then roll into our dairy farm, and the performances that we in the performance of our dairy farm that we're going to come up against. And then what does that do with the dairy farm economy? So we have this whole chain from food, the cow converting the food to the feed, and then the feed being converted into milk production, and all the way through it's impacted by the climate, and it's impacted by the cow, and it's impacted by the technology. So this is why I'm saying our three key critical aspects of dairy farming for the future are those three things. So let's look at tomorrow. What does tomorrow look like for us? So here's a picture of a dairy farm. This dairy farm is a dairy farm that I used to manage in China. And so this dairy farm, it was built back in 2011, and it was a mechanically ventilated, open-sided freestall farm, right? So it was built for today. It wasn't built for tomorrow. So if we look at it for what would today's farm look like tomorrow, in this scenario here, I have an open-sided barn, and I'm getting hugely impacted by the weather. So, you know, I've added into my barn my fans and my feed lane soaking, for example, but I'm still just not able to get the cooling right, because the humidity and the heat is still impacting on my cow performance in the summer. So my milk production goes, and then after summer, when I have more cows calving, my milk production comes back up. But it takes a while. So what do? Well, so for tomorrow, I'm going to enclose the sidewalls, and I'm going to make these tunnel vent barns. So tomorrow's cooling strategy or ventilation strategy is put sidewalls on, put exhaust fans in the end wall, and now I'm going to shut out as much of the external environment as I can, and adding those exhaust fans on the end allows me to really push the air through the building and try and eliminate the impact of the humidity in particular on my dairy farm. So my little analogy for you in terms of how can you say that by adding sidewalls and exhaust fans, how's that going to actually remove some of the humidity impact. So let's take the scenario of it's hot and humid and I'm walking. It's hot and humid and I'm on a bicycle, and it's hot and humid and I'm on a motorbike. So when I'm walking and when it's hot and humid, I'm really not making any air velocity or any air speed. So I'm feeling the impact of heat stress. So that's a dairy barn and I have no ventilation and no cooling. If I'm on a bicycle, you know, when I get a little bit of momentum and I'm riding on the flat, or I've got a lot of momentum and I'm riding down the hill, as I'm picking up speed, I don't seem to feel the same amount of heat and humidity as when I was moving slower. So that's the analogy of an open-sided barn with fans over the freestalls, fans down the feed lane, and cooling, right? I'm getting some air and it's having some impact, but it's not having enough when it's really hot and humid. So that's my motorbike, right? I get on my motorbike and I pick up speed, and when I hit 30 miles an hour, 50 kilometers an hour, that's when I'm not feeling the impact of the heat, because I'm generating enough airspeed past my body to not feel it. And that's what closing the sidewalls up and putting exhaust fans in does for dairy cows. If I can add enough airspeed or air velocity going through my barn, then I am going to eliminate a fair percentage of the heat that's impacting on my milk production. And we've done that in a climate where we're close to the equator, so there's a lot of humidity, and by shutting up the sides and adding a lot of ventilation or exhaust fans on the end wall, we have managed to remove that impact. And you know, you would look at that and go, well, why did you do it like that? Because really it's not that hot or it's not that bad. But we're not only making this facility for today, but we're actually making it for the future. So the beauty is today, when it's super hot, I can have these fans going at 100%. When it's not so hot, I've got my variable frequency drive and I'm not moving it so fast. So I get it up for the future. And what you see is some really great impacts, because, you know, the customer now, he's got a model that works very well. It's a plug and play for him. He's seen that on his old building compared to his new building, he's getting an extra 4 liters per cow per day just through that. And this is comparing first lactation to first lactation because it was a new installation. And his comment was, I'm not getting that same influence as I did last year when I get the high humidities. So this is where we look at future proofing or futurizing our dairy farm. What are some of the things that we are going to be brave enough to do today to make sure that in a couple of tomorrows, I am still going to be okay? I'm not going, oh man, I have to change this again, because every time we do that, you know, it's an additional cost. So, you know, so what we have is a today farm, and then a tomorrow farm is putting end walls and exhaust fans in there. But let's look at a future farm. So, you know, the future farm could be based on what we need to do. It could be a much larger scale again, and it may have to be a lot of smaller dairy farms come into it, and it may be a cooperative, or we're just going to be ending up with larger scales. But we have this future farm. So being the future, it's a model. And so what we have is the eco-climate barn. So the eco-climate barn will effectively be like an air-conditioned building. So it holds the temperature or the barn environment at optimal. So optimal could be that I'm going to have my temperature sitting at between 12 to 15 degrees Celsius, and my humidity is not really going to get past 50%. And I'm keeping that in the perfect environment for all my cows, and I have complete and utter control of that for 365 days of the year. And then I have my dedicated feed production. So that's I'm growing the feed myself on farm, so hydroponically, and as my facilities build, you know, I'm adding more. So my little blue arrow there is showing in that area there, I'm now being self-sufficient, and this is where I'm growing my feed. It's completely contained, so I'm not suffering from the peaks and troughs of growth or yield, because I'm not having any influences from the environment as well, right? So as cows are influenced, we have to remember that our plants are also influenced. But being dairy farmers, we're always fixated on the cow and not necessarily fixated on the feed. So then I've got this, and it's a dedicated area, and I can duplicate it. And then I've got my, I guess, my nutrient refinery and my waste recovery area. And so what that does is it separates the liquids and the solids. Some of the solids gets used as deep bedding or bedding in my freestall barns. So it means that I'm recycling that, and part of that gets pelletized, and then I'm returning it to the cropping land. So that could be cropping land for other people, that could be cropping land for feeding people. It doesn't matter, but I'm just returning some of that nutrient, because I'm not going to be needing all of it within my circle. And then the liquids, they end up being used back in my feeding center or in my hydroponics, because it will have all the necessary nutrient that I require, and I'm using that water to supply the feed center. And then also from my effluent or nutrient recovery, I'm actually using renewable energy. So I'm circling back and I'm using renewable power, and that methane can be used for cooling or running the facilities. It could be based on the size, running the entire facility. It just could be running the barns, you know, but what we're doing is that we're just keeping the inner circle, and we're being 100% sustainable. All right. So this is a concept. So one concept of what future farming could be. So, you know, we have to think about where we are right now in our thought process, and am I going to be dairy farming in the future? Do I want to be dairy farming in the future? Because, you know, right now there are a whole lot of pressures on the dairy industry in terms of compliance, public perception. Because of public perception, we have to change the way that we farm. You know, I have an example where I'm working with a customer right now, and the way that they're having to design their dairy farm is to meet public perception. So it's not necessarily meeting the cow's requirements 100%, but it's trying to meet the balance between the public's perception of the dairy farm and maximizing to the best of their ability how they're going to design the dairy farm to make it comfortable. So, you know, there's always still going to be that education process, but do I have the energy, and do I really want to be doing that? So that's, do I want to be dairy farming? And then what is that going to look like? Is it going to look like this? Is it going to be this big monster dairy farm that I have to be able to make sure that I can still be doing what I enjoy? In this could only be in 5 years' time that we start to see something like this. There's always going to be variations of something, but is that really where I want to be? Is this what it's going to look like for me? So the important thing is to be intentional when you're thinking about what you're going to be doing with your dairy farm, or if you're going to be building a new dairy farm, or if you're going to be expanding a new dairy farm. So you got to think about, you got to think out past tomorrow, right? And then when you're planning for it, you've actually got to own it. And you don't necessarily need to be concerned about what the guy down the road's doing, or what your friends who are dairy farm are doing in the same country, in the same region. It's always got to be your plan. In every single dairy farm that I've been on, everybody has a system or has a type of facility, but the way that those facilities operate and the performance that everybody gets out of their facility or their system is really different, because everybody manages it and owns it differently. So it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you plan it and as long as you own it, and as long as that's going to be profitable. Because obviously the most sustainable aspect of dairy farming is profitability. So you have to be profitable. So again, when you're putting together your plan, you've got to look at, what is the climate going to be like? So, you know, if I'm seeing a 4% increase in temperatures, then if I'm still going to be here in 20 years' time, how do I start that plan? I don't necessarily need to have it all put in place tomorrow, but obviously I'm going to have steps. So taking into consideration the climate, taking into consideration what is the cow going to look like? I mean, we know and we see that a lot of dairy farms, or a number of dairy farms, are looking to make their cow smaller, but try and make her more efficient at converting feed. So we're still going to get the same sort of income coming from our cow. And then it's looking at the technology. What sort of technology am I going to be putting in my farm to help me be better at dairy farming in terms of planning, being proactive? And then what sort of people am I going to be putting in place on my dairy farm to be able to manage all this data? Because we end up now being, I guess, data managers in many respects. So, you know, as long as we plan, our plan is in place, and we've got the plan in for our future goal, not everybody else's future goal, but our future goal. And we're not gonna miss or skip a step. Okay. I always say, or not always, I've just started saying that we have to be brave, right? We've got to be brave enough, because we know what we know from yesterday, but we've got to figure out what the future is. And, you know, we have to be confident and brave enough to take that step forward and not worry about what's going on around us, what other people think, right? We've got to start formulating that plan. And are you going to be an innovator? Are you going to be an adapter? Or are you going to be a dinosaur where you were just too late to the party and you missed out? So to me, planning is everything. However, as I have here from Dwight Eisenhower, is that planning is everything. However, plans are nothing if you're not planning the plan. So again, thank you very much for listening to my insights, and they are my insights on you know, thinking about future and dairy farming, and understanding that it's not just about the cow, it's about that whole infrastructure that, you know, is impactful on our business. And it's also about how brave are you going to be? You know, how many steps are you going to take to get to where you want to be? And are you going to be planning it and being thoughtful about that planning process? So I believe the floor is open for questions. Karen?
Great, thank you very much, Sue. Would you mind turning to the next slide? We do have a question for you, but just before we do that, I want to let everybody know that we've got a great lineup of webinars for 2021, and you can visit our website for more information or sign up for our newsletter. So the first question is, usually the big problem is, I don't have the money for all of that. Do you have priorities when it comes to investing in new technologies?
Everybody is going to have a different priority based on where their farm is right now and where they want to be. And yeah, I mean, nobody really has all the money to do it all, but it's just figuring out right now. If it was me, I'd be sitting back and go, okay, right now, where are my biggest challenges and what technology is available to help me overcome those challenges, to then figure out what is the best way to do it. You know, it might be, I need robot milkers, but is the infrastructure in place to easily put a robot into an existing facility, or do you have to build a new one to do that? So then if the answer is I can't really do that right now, so then what's the next thing that can help you, right? How automated is the parlor right now? What software are you using to capture the data that can help you with your animal management? So and then the other aspect of it is, you know, what is my staff like, and then who do I need to train within my staff to be able to get me to the next step? So yeah, I can't answer that question, but you just kind of have to think through those processes to determine the steps that you would take into which pieces of technology to add and when.
Perfect, thank you very much. Does pasture grazing have a future?
It does, but there's areas now where it's becoming harder and harder. So, for example, I mean, as you can guess, I'm not Canadian, and I cut my teeth on pasture grazing for a very long time, and our neighbours just over the pond in Australia are having more harsh climate changes than, say, in New Zealand. And you are seeing these guys change from, you've got guys that are grazing at night, so the cows are under a cover during the day, and then you're seeing some of these guys that are doing that are now shifting into, well, gee, I might as well put all my cows under a roof and keep them there all day, every day, because my water usage is not really efficient just to grow grass. I can be way more effective if I can use that water and grow crop. So corn silage, for example, right? And so you're seeing that sort of shift. And in Australia, in the more extreme climates where they don't see rain for years, for example, or they're getting massive deluges of rain, these guys are kind of shifting into that direction. Go further south into New Zealand, and in the more southern regions of the country, they're not having those same sort of impacts. So yes, you will see partial farming, but you're not going to see as much of it.
Thank you very much. I'll give it just another minute. If you have any questions, you can send it through the question and answer section at the bottom of the screen or through the chat. And if there are no more, we'll just say thank you very much, Sue. We really appreciated your presentation, and thanks everybody for joining us. Have a happy holiday, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thank you. Bye.